Now I'll turn it over to Shane and Jake to get started on today's topic of supporting your IT mission, securing your endpoints with the cloud. And just in case you haven't seen it, though, we have put a survey in the chat window. We're going to go over those survey results in a couple slides. So we'd love for you to go ahead and take that survey. If you see it in the chat window, please go ahead and make your choices. We're just kind of curious about where you're coming into this conversation from a licensing perspective. So with that, Shane and Jake, take it away. I think Jake's going to start us off framing this up from a zero trust standpoint and where the endpoint sits in on that model. Go ahead, Jake.
Sure, absolutely. So just a real quick note about this slide. If you've looked at the recent discussions we've had on this, you've seen this slide before, but for those that haven't seen the previous YouAlreadyOwnIts, we feel that operationalizing people and tools through a common zero trust mindset is critical to protecting your environment. Our philosophy is that you have to have people that are trained and skilled. You have to have adequate tools, and those two things alone can't lead to success. You have to have a great operationalizing mindset, and all three of those is like the perfect recipe. So essentially, as you look across these boxes, there are 6 domains, if you will, for zero trust, and we're going to be focused in today just on the devices section, which is highlighted in blue. And this is where we're going to talk through kind of the whole concept of zero trust in a device standpoint. So that's all I have for this slide. Shane, if you want to move forward.
Okay, thanks, Jake, for framing that. Zero Trust is a big initiative for both Microsoft and Planet. So we wanted to set the stage using Zero Trust, and I'm going to refer back to that at various times during this presentation. So let's get on into the main title topic, supporting your IT mission, securing your endpoints with the Microsoft Cloud. I want to, in the spirit of you already own it, I'd like to frame this discussion of endpoint security around licensing. And there's a great tool that Jake actually pointed out to me recently, a good website called m365maps.com. Now, I like this tool a lot. I'm going to make this link available to you guys after the call. But it's not an official Microsoft offering. It's made by a Microsoft employee by the name of Aaron Dinage. So it's not official, so that there's that caveat there. But it's a great way to visualize Microsoft's different licensing offerings and what kind of features you get in each one of these offerings. So for example, I can drill into the Microsoft 365 Enterprise and I can see exactly what's included in Microsoft 365 E3 or Microsoft 365 E5 Step Up program. And I can see specifically what's available in Windows Enterprise E3. Now, this isn't a comprehensive list of all the features that are going to be available in these different areas, but it does help you just see quickly, what I get with each one of these licensing levels. You can see horizontally going across here, it's got listed some different offerings like Windows Enterprise E3 and Enterprise Mobility and Security E3 and Office 365 E3. And it shows you at the top how they're all included inside Microsoft 365 E3 here. And he's got all kinds of charts that he maintains here for different offerings from Microsoft. So it's a great tool. So let's go back to the deck. So I want to frame this discussion in terms of these different levels, and so based on what I was just showing you there, Windows Enterprise E3 is probably the lowest level, the first layer of security that you're going to need. It includes a lot of things that are built into the operating system, but some other security features as well. Before we jump into that, we're actually have our first poll question that we want to ask, which is, what kind of licenses do you own right now amongst these different types? So I will let Ken, are you going to handle
we've got a couple of people voting, but we certainly could use a lot more. We got about over 30 or 40 people in this session. So by all means, scroll up if you haven't seen it yet in the chat window. There should be a selection.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in the chat window. So go ahead and try to do this. We've got some people just typing in the answers. That's fine as well. It looks like the majority of folks are in Microsoft 365 E5, at least for the ones that have submitted, or the one, well, yep. So that really tells us a lot, right? I mean, Shane's going to talk a lot about what's involved in, at the E3 level today and the Microsoft 365 E3 level. But certainly if you've got Microsoft 365 E5, there is plenty of capabilities in that suite. In fact, I've read, and I'll see if I can get the article for you and put it in the chat window, but 16 tools, security tools can be replaced by the E5 suite. So it's a great little read if you haven't read it yet. And I'll put that in the window. It looks like the majority are either in the E3 level or E5 level, which is kind of what we kind of expected. So we appreciate that you put in and keep going, keep putting those votes in there, submitting your choices. We'll take a look at this maybe again at the end of the session if you haven't gotten a chance to put it in yet. Thanks, Shane. Go ahead.
All right, thanks, Ken. And I'm glad to hear that a lot of people are on Microsoft 365 E5, because if we're talking about you already own it, it's good to know that you guys are going to own everything that we're talking about here today. But if you don't, then you can see what changes you might like to make in your licensing based on what you see here. But okay, so first layer of security, Windows Enterprise E3. So this includes a lot of things that are built into the Windows 10 operating system, and now Windows 11, of course. Such as BitLocker and Windows Update, Windows Hello. You're probably familiar with some of these, at least at a basic level. BitLocker being their Microsoft's volume encryption product for the desktop and for other platforms too. But and Windows Update, Windows Hello for using biometrics to sign into devices instead of using a traditional password. The fourth and fifth bullets are actually fall very well into the whole discussion of zero trust, which because this is Microsoft Defender Application Control and Microsoft Defender Application Guard. Application Control is exactly what it sounds like. It's controlling your applications and what apps are allowed to run and which are not. And as opposed to coming at this from a blacklisting approach of what you are not allowed to run, this is purely a whitelisting approach. This is basically saying we are going to define a certain circle of trust of what applications are we consider trusted as an organization, and our users are only allowed to run those applications, no others. And you can define these. You don't have to explicitly define every single application in your enterprise app portfolio. There's different tools you can use, different ways you can define what circle of trust means. Like circle of trust could mean that Microsoft has defined the reputation level of many apps out in the ecosystem already. So if Microsoft says it has a good reputation, then I'm going to trust it too. Or you could say anything I'm pushing out with Configuration Manager is going to be within my circle of trust. So those are applications that everybody can run. So there's different ways to do it. And then Application Guard does basically takes the same approach from a website perspective. So you can define what websites are within your circle of trust, what domains are within your circle of trust. And for those websites, a user can use whatever web browser they have access to go to those sites and do whatever they need to in those sites. But if it's not a trusted website, then you have to go through specifically a Microsoft Edge browser window, and it's going to be a virtualized browser window that's completely cut off from the rest of your operating system, so that it can't, a bad actor can't try to, get access to your kernel or do anything bad or change any of the files on your system. So so that's the approach for Application Guard. And there's a whole bunch of other things here as well. I should point out that the two bullets here, Device Guard, Credential Guard, those only come in Windows Enterprise Edition, whereas all the rest of these are going to be in either Windows Pro or the Windows Enterprise Edition. So just wanted to point that out. Okay, and another thing to point out is Windows 11 and what are the changes coming with that. So Windows 11, I would say it doesn't so much as add new security features as much as it improves on the existing Windows 10 security features. and makes them required. That's kind of the biggie, is when you go to install Windows 11, if you don't have the proper hardware, if you don't have like a TPM 2.0 chip on your motherboard that is used for a lot of the security technologies in Windows, if you don't have a CPU that supports virtualization-based security, and UEFI and secure boot and all those things, then you're not going to be able to run Windows 11. Microsoft's vision with Microsoft 11 is that we're really going to help people take control of their organizations, and we're going to cut off like a great number of potential attacks. We're just going to cut them off at the knees by requiring a lot of these technologies that are available in Windows 10 today, but haven't necessarily been applied by everybody either, because they have legacy hardware that doesn't support these things, or they just haven't gotten around to it as an initiative for turning on these capabilities. Microsoft actually describes Windows 11 as a zero trust ready operating system. So if you have a zero trust initiative in your organization, then you want to be looking at Windows 11 for that reason alone. Okay, so let's add another, I don't want to spend a ton of time on just Windows Enterprise E3. I want to get into some of these other layers during this time. So let's get into the next layer, which is going to be Enterprise Mobility and Security E3. So EMS E3 includes a bunch of components. They're listed over here on the right side. I want to point out that both Windows Enterprise E3 and EMS E3, as I mentioned before on that website I was showing you, they're both included in Microsoft 365 E3. But EMS E3, if you were to purchase just that as a standalone, this is what the components you would get. You would get Azure AD Premium Plan 1 and Microsoft Intune, Azure Information Protection, and so on down this list here. I mainly want to focus on Microsoft Intune and what it does for you, although there's some security things that Azure AD can do for you at a device level, but it mostly ties together with what you can do in Intune. So Intune, if you're not familiar with it, is Microsoft's cloud-based management tool for doing mobile device management and mobile application management and PC management. It's a component of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So with Intune, the different platforms you can manage are Windows 11 and Windows 10, iOS, Android, and Mac OS. So it's mainly focused on end user devices, not servers. Now, enrolling these devices into Intune doesn't inherently improve their security in any meaningful way. I mean, only from the standpoint of identifying that it's a corporate device because they're able to enroll it, or maybe it's a BYOD device, and you can validate that it's owned by your user who has a valid Intune license for your organization. So that in and of itself is all it would do if you're enrolling a device into Intune. The main benefit of in Intune is that you can manage all the different security options that we were just talking about that you get through Windows Enterprise E3, and you can add you can apply some other additional security options as well. So let me flip over for a second to Intune. Now, Intune is in the Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center, which because it's a component of that. The Microsoft Endpoint Manager is what Microsoft rebranded. I wouldn't say Intune. It's not a rebranding of Intune per se, as it is so much as it is like bringing together Configuration Manager and co-management of devices with both Intune and Configuration Manager, and Windows Autopilot and Desktop Analytics. There's a bunch of tools that it brings together into one cloud portal here where you can access everything. So this is Intune, and one of the things that I can do in there is one of the first things you usually want to do is go in and say, I want to create some compliance policies. I've got my different platforms I can manage here, and I can go into Windows and I can create a compliance policy. And so this is just our demo lab tenant here at Planet. But I'll show you some of the things that we've created. Here's a compliance policy. And if I go in and look at the different settings, you can see that I can decide what determines a compliance for a device. I can say that for a device to be compliant, it has to be BitLockered. It needs to be running secure boot, needs to be running code integrity. I can say that it has to be, the minimum level of a certain version of Windows 10, for example. I can say that config manager has to require compliance as well, and to say that's a requirement. So I've got all these different indicators that I can say what defines a compliant device. Now, I can apply this to any devices I want. You can apply different policies to different sets of devices, and then I can determine what the action is. So I can say, okay, if you're not compliant, then what are we going to do? The default is to mark the device as non-compliant, and usually that's set to 0 or right away. But there's other things you can do as well. You can send an email to the user, and you can copy other recipients on that if you want, or you can retire the device from Intune as well. But one of the main benefits is when you mark it as non-compliant in here, then you can go over to your conditional access policies that I can access through Intune. Really, conditional access policies are a component of Azure Active Directory, but they tie together very closely to Intune's compliance. So it allows you a way to jump over there from here. But I can come in here and I can define a conditional access policy here that says, if the device is not compliant, then you cannot get access to certain cloud services. Like, I'm not going to give you access to Exchange Online or to SharePoint Online or whatever. So, I mean, conditional access policies can do much more than that, but that's just one of the main ways that it ties into Intune. So that provides you security right away in saying that if the device, first of all, you can't find out if it's compliant if it's not enrolled in Intune. So by requiring compliance in order to pass one of these conditional access policies, I'm basically saying you have to have an enrolled device in Intune, which means that you need to have an Intune license, and you also need to be found compliant. So it needs to be a healthy device, and only then are you allowed to access these different cloud resources. So it's a great combination of things that lets you apply security. Beyond that, there's plenty of other things you can do. There's a lot of functionality in here. You can just go to your configuration profiles. I'm just looking at Windows right now, but there's, I can do this for all the other platforms as well. But I can come in here and I can create a configuration profile where I say I want to apply this to Windows 10. And I've got all of these templates available to me that have tons of policy settings that are defined inside. If you can't find a policy setting in here that has a nice button or configuration window that you can use, a nice GUI to do it, then you can also just define it as a custom policy, and you can define it through your configuration service policies through Windows. So this allows me to do lots of things. I can push down security configurations, device restrictions, endpoint protection, identity protection settings. I can push down email profiles and VPN and Wi-Fi profiles with this. I can push down certificates for authentication to go with those profiles. So there's tons of things that I can configure through there. Other endpoint security items is if we go over to the endpoint security node, then you can find Microsoft's collecting a lot of the security related things underneath this endpoint security node. So I can come in here and I can create antivirus policy and push that out to devices. I can create a policy to set up BitLocker on devices, manage the Windows firewall. I can create a policy to manage my endpoint detection and response. Now, chiefly what this policy is doing is onboarding the device to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and which used to be called Microsoft Defender ATP, or Advanced Threat Protection. So that's mainly for onboarding the device. So there's a couple of options, things you can configure in there as well. Attack surface reduction is all based on managing a lot of those components that we were looking at that are just inherently in the operating system. I mean, when you think about it, antivirus, that's just managing Microsoft Defender antivirus, which is already built into Windows 10, right? You're just managing it from this console, and you're able to get reports back about, what kind of malware is out there, and make sure that all your devices have the right policies applied to them, and it's all configured. The attack surface reduction policies allows you to come in here and manage a lot of the different things that are available. This application control here, that's the same application control I was talking about before, the Microsoft Defender application control. And this one up here, app and browser isolation, is referring to Microsoft Defender application guard. So I can use all of these things to harden the device to reduce the attack surface overall for bad actors, so they can't come in and take advantage of vulnerabilities and third-party programs that might not be locked down very well or coded very well. Account
Shane?
protection. Yes.
Hey, if I can add something really quick.
Sure. Yeah.
From a compliance standpoint, this dashboard is kind of a golden nugget for you, because by creating those policies, this is where you can generate your evidence for compliance activities and tie the users to those things. So if you're being audited on, how you manage the endpoint, or are you encrypting the disk, or you have firewall set up, those types of things, you can generate the policies from or generate kind of the screenshots from here as evidence, and use that to further enhance your compliance audit whenever the auditors come on board. So this is a great dashboard to create artifacts for your compliance standard.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because we got before a few days ago, when we were just planning for this office hours session, I know a question was brought up around BitLocker compliance and reporting, and I'm going to address that in more detail at the end of the call when we do our Q&A part of the call here. So if you're interested in that, stick around, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that, because obviously that's a pretty important point, is being able to prove that a certain device is encrypted is a pretty important. So we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Jake, Shane, I got another question for you, and
Sure.
I
Yeah.
put you on the spot because I didn't ask you this question in advance. So the question,
what? No, just only softballs. Only softballs. Go ahead.
The question is if folks are using AVD, can they use Endpoint Manager today to manage those devices in AVD?
So that's a good question. The answer is yes, but it depends on how you're setting up Azure Virtual Desktop. It gets a little complex with some of the different with whether you're in a government tenant or whether you're in a commercial tenant, and depending on whether you're joining the VMs, like the session hosts for your host pool for Azure Virtual Desktop. It depends on whether you're joining them to your on-prem AD or Azure AD domain services, or if you're joining them natively to Azure AD, right? So it traditionally, AVD has required a Windows Server AD domain. Either on-prem, you could extend it into the cloud with a couple of domain controllers, and you could do all your authentication that way. So you would join the computer accounts to your on-prem AD with that, or you could use Azure AD domain services, which mimics a Windows Server AD environment as a cloud service, and you could join your computers to that. But the problem is that what Intune's requirement is that the device be either hybrid Azure AD joined or natively Azure AD joined. It's got to be one of the two if you want to manage the device. And so if you if you're synchronizing your computer accounts from your on-prem AD up to Azure AD, that satisfies it. But if you use Azure AD domain services, then there's no way to use Intune, because you can't. It's not supported to use Windows to use the Azure AD Connect tool to synchronize objects from Azure AD domain services into Azure AD. So that kind of leaves you with no way to manage those devices in Intune. Now that native Azure AD join is available, that should become an option, right? And we should be able to manage devices with Intune. But the problem is that in the government tenant, I mentioned before, is that in government Azure, Intune does not have a lot of capabilities around managing Windows 10 multi-session, which is the main operating system that most organizations go with when they do AVD, because it's so much more cost effective, So it's kind of a ball of yarn right now with
Sure.
The different capabilities. So we have to, hopefully we'll get that as soon as like it catches up and we start being able to do all that Intune management to Azure AD natively. I can't wait till all that goes away. We can just say, just join these session hosts to, Azure AD, and we're good to go. We'll manage them with Intune, and we're good. So yeah, but
Appreciate answering that, Shane, on the fly. I know that was a great answer, and I'm sure that was on a lot of people's minds, that they just want one interface to manage all their devices. And so it looks like we're getting there, right? But it may not be there yet today.
We're getting there. We're getting there. As you know, government always trails behind the commercial Azure tenant and capabilities. So that's one area. Intune, for the most part, is the same. Whether you own E3 or E5 or whether you have a government tenant or commercial tenant, it's mostly the same. But in this thing, it's different. So yeah, but we're getting there. Okay.
Thanks.
So anyway, a lot of capabilities in here. Under the endpoint security node. I also want to point out that you can also push out security baselines. So these security baselines, if you're not familiar, it's Microsoft's recommended settings for hardening your environment or hardening your, like for example, the Windows 10 device. This is their recommended settings, and you could just deploy it out as is, or you can modify it according to your needs and push that out. A word of caution, just don't just blow this out to everybody at once. You'll want to be careful with this because this could impact user productivity. I mean, it might lock something down in a way that an application doesn't like, and suddenly a user can't do what they need to do. So test it thoroughly and and push it out in phases slowly, but great tool for hardening your environment there. All right, let's get back to the deck. All right, so that's Intune. Mainly Intune is the reason why I list it as a layer of security is because it allows you to it allows you to make it an action. You're actually doing something to apply the security and to manage all these settings. Because from an enterprise perspective, it might be great that Windows 10 has all these great security features in the operating system, but how does my IT department manage it from a central place? Well, this is the cloud management answer to that. And I just want to point out that Intune, just about every organization today has to comply with some kind of, one of these standards here. Some of the ones that we run into a lot working with customers is NIST 800-171, and CMMC is becoming a big thing. CGIS, FedRAMP, these are some of the HIPAA. These are a lot of the ones that we run into a lot of, where it might say, we're coming in to help an organization deploy Intune, but what they really want is Intune that helps me comply with one of these regulations, and so that's where it gets, where the rubber hits the road, and we've got to work and figure out exactly what we need to set in Intune. And we're working with customers. We map a lot of these things over. We've mapped a lot of the CMMC and NIST 800-171 settings over to Intune settings at this point, to be able to lock those down. It's especially important in the example we just talked about with Azure Virtual Desktop, because we're setting up a whole new environment up in the cloud, right? And now we can't just leave it out there completely open and not secured. We have to figure out how we're going to patch it and how we're going to lock down, any vulnerabilities. And we need to figure out how we're going to make sure everything is encrypted. And in some cases we're applying the STIG, using a group policy object. We'll apply a STIG to it, or use Intune to apply one of the security baselines. We're doing lots of different things to achieve compliance in these different areas.
Hey, Shane.
Yeah, Jake, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of add, and I just wanted to say that just by purchasing, Intune is not a magic bullet, right? Or none of these services are a magic pill that makes you compliant. The auditors are typically more focused on the how than the what. So how you've implemented is more important than what you've implemented. But at the end of the day, if you are using Intune to manage, then they're going to ask the deeper how questions. So just because you have it on your purchase order does not mean that you're going to be compliant. And that goes pretty much for all those types of services. So and just one more added note, CIS has standards or benchmarks for best practices on their website. So that would be a great tool as well. They've got specifically how to secure an Azure environment and how to secure a modern workplace type of environment. So those are some links that I think we can add for everyone to take a peek at, but they're really good. That's all I had.
All right, thanks, Jake. Yeah, and this is not a full list here. Intune currently supports over 50 different compliance offerings, and probably more than that now. I think that statistic was accurate around March of 2019. So there's probably more by now. But again, yeah, like Jake said, it's a good point. I mean, it supports it, but it's a big difference between, it's not one of these. It's not one of these solutions that if I go in and enroll all my devices in Intune, suddenly they're compliant. It's not going to be like that. Intune even if you configure everything you can possibly configure in Intune to get to improve your NIST 800-171 compliance, for example, there's still a lot of things that are required by the 800-171 that can't be addressed necessarily through a technical solution, or maybe they're addressed through your identity solution instead, or maybe they're addressed just by doing an audit every 6 months, or through certain processes and reviews that you need to conduct as more of a process related task. So, it's more complicated than that, but it's definitely a great tool to help you achieve those compliance in those areas. Okay, so we talked about EMS E3 and Intune. Let's expand the bubble a little further and go into MDE. So MDE meaning Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. There was a recent announcement for MDE that for this new Plan 1 preview was announced. And so I wanted to review that with you for a minute. I want to point out that, again, all of these are included in Microsoft 365 E3. I'm going to talk more about licensing in just a minute for MDE Plan 1 preview. Just little insight, it's free right now. So there's no downside to trying out the Plan 1 preview. Since it's in preview, it's free. When it goes generally available, the licensing is going to change, and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so Plan 1 capabilities. This picture is really all of Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. It's a full comprehensive solution from Microsoft that they call Microsoft Defender for Endpoint that includes a bunch of different components. And I'm going to save some of these for later. But basically, the left half of this chart is showing you solutions that prevent attacks from occurring in your organization. Whereas the right side, all these three items over here, are more geared towards, okay, the breach has already happened. Now we need to address it as quickly and efficiently as possible and make sure it never happens again. So that's kind of how that's broken down. What you get with MDE Plan 1 is these items highlighted in green. You get the attack surface reduction capabilities. You get next generation protection. You get centralized configuration administration of both of those components, and it's got APIs that Microsoft provides that let you integrate this solution with other third-party vendors or other Microsoft products, other workflows you might have in your organization. Now, also another difference is that MDE supports a pretty wide range of client platforms. This one for Plan 1, it does narrow it down a little bit, so you only get you're only addressing Windows and Mac OS, Android, and iOS, which is still a lot, really, and the main thing that people want to address. Now, if you're listening closely, we already talked about attack surface reduction, next generation protection, and if you're like me, the inquisitive mind, I look at this and I think, well, what do I need this for? I've already, Windows 10 has, if I'm just looking at Windows 10, now these other platforms are a different story, right? I'll talk about that in a second. But if I'm just looking at Windows 10, I've already got attack surface reduction capabilities that are built into Windows 10. And I've got Microsoft Defender Antivirus that's built into Windows 10, which is basically what next generation protection is referring to. And I can manage it through Intune. So what am I really getting, right? Well, it all comes down to this. I think with Windows 10, the main benefit you're getting is this centralized configuration administration, because this allows you to see across your organization how everything is configured. It allows you to tie together like attack surface reduction. It makes more sense when it's taken in full with the whole MDE, but there's benefits even without the full MDE, in that you can see how your organization is doing as far as being, having these technologies deployed across your organization. And then with next generation protection, the biggest capability is the fact that I can go into my my Microsoft 365 Defender portal, and I can see alerts coming up into that portal, and that shows me, hey, there's a malware attack that just happened on this device over here, and in Microsoft Defender Antivirus, it quarantined it, and now we got to figure out what we want to do about this. It gives you an enterprise view into that, because the Intune reports are not super great in that area, and it's certainly not done in like an alert format where you could tie it to notifying someone that a certain alert came in, and letting them know that there's an issue going on. And beyond that, it helps, it interacts with all these other components, and it actually requires for these other platforms, Mac OS, Android, and iOS, it's actually adding something to that. You have to install a Microsoft Defender for Endpoint app on these devices that will actually, give you next generation protection and allow you to do attack surface reduction technologies on those platforms. Now, I also need to put a caveat in here that what those specific things are that you can do are going to vary from one platform to another. So just a little caveat there that it's not always going to look the same for every platform. Your Microsoft 365 Defender portal is, when you use just only plan 1, is going to look a little bit smaller. You're going to see fewer options in here. This is the portal here. If I flip over to my portal, for example, where is my, hold on a second. Here, this is what my portal looks like. This is again our demo lab, but you can see that I've got all of these options up at the top, including where my incidents and alerts come in, and my action center for when things need to be taken action on, and all these different options in here. And you can see that I've got a bunch of options, more than you get with just MDE Plan 1, of things I can do with endpoints. I should point out this Microsoft 365 Defender portal. This is new within the last, I don't know, 6 months or so, and it became now it's the default portal. The old portal used to have only Microsoft Defender for Endpoint technology feeding up into it, but now it's got Defender for Office 365 and Defender for Identity, all coming into the same console, along with Cloud App Security as well. So all of that's kind of feeding into this same portal. So it's really nice actually, because you can see the interaction of those different components as an overall XDR system, or extended, detection and response system. So it's a great option. But I just want to show you that there's a difference between what you get there and what you get, with MDE Plan 1. So this is what licensing is going to look like for MDE Plan 1 when it becomes generally available. They're estimating that's going to be later this year. And so you can purchase it one of two ways. You can either get the standalone option for MDE Plan 1, or you can get it's included for Microsoft 365 E3. If you already own Microsoft 365 E3 or E5, then, well, with E5, you're going to have MDE Plan 2, which is all of MDE and includes all of this as well. But with either E3 or E5, you would own the MDE Plan 1 as well. Okay, so let's move one layer past and let's talk about the overall MDE Plan 2 and what's included in there. Now, unlike the other components that we've discussed so far, MDE Plan 2 is not included in Microsoft 365 E3. The full MDE product requires either Windows Enterprise E5 or Microsoft 365 E5, or you could also purchase Microsoft 365 E5 Security. So those are different ways you can purchase it. And this shows the differences between Plan 1 and Plan 2. If you look at the Plan 1 rows, you can see it's talking about the next generation anti-malware. It's talking about a lot of the attack surface reduction technologies, including the attack surface reduction rules that you can change up and deploy through Intune. It's talking about the integration with a SIM or with other tools that you might have. That's all included in P1. But then going on beyond that is where P2 has the endpoint detection and response, automated investigation and remediation, threat and vulnerability management, and so on, all these things. This sandbox for deep analysis allows you to upload what you think are suspicious files, and you can basically detonate them in a safe environment, so you're not doing it in your environment, possibly introducing a threat. So there's lots of capabilities in here. And then there's Microsoft Threat Experts, which I need to caveat, that's not available in government tenants, but for commercial tenants, you can get access to this Microsoft Threat Experts. It is an additional purchase. It's available for purchase as an add-on. But what that does is it gives you access to, it gives you these targeted attack notifications, or TANs, that are issued by Microsoft security experts and give you deep knowledge into what are the latest attacks that have come out, and it gives you access to experts on demand. So this is like reactive. You see these TANs come in once in a while, and proactively you can reach out to experts and for issues that you're not able to resolve yourselves, you can reach out to them and get help from Microsoft. So in order to frame the EDR conversation, I feel like I need to spend a minute talking about evolution of endpoint defense. I think everybody knows traditional antivirus has been around for many years, and it was fine when, back when attacks were more recreational and simple. But the attacks that are more sophisticated now and have kind of outgrown it. It's mainly based on using signatures. Some traditional antivirus might use some kind of heuristic analysis to see if running processes or installed software have suspicious properties, or they might do integrity checking to see if files have been tampered with by malware on your machine. So there's different things that traditional antivirus, different ways it might work. Usually uses a signature file, and it can only identify threats that it knows about. Can't address zero-day attacks, for example. Now, for dealing with unknown threats, next generation antivirus can, I don't know, depending on who you talk to, which security company you talk to, they define it different ways. But most people seem to agree that next generation antivirus is what it detects malware based on more of like machine learning and artificial intelligence, and a lot of times it's cloud-based, and it's able to respond to threats in real time. So, for example, for unknown threats or zero-day threats, it's able to address those at real time, and it's able to see things, more complicated attacks like fileless attacks that don't affect any particular file, that maybe they just use a script or something. It's able to detect those as well. And then we've got endpoint detection and response. So antivirus is really, like we said, it's chiefly focused on preventing attacks. EDR, on the other hand, is focused on post-breach remediation and doing it as quickly as possible, right? So it's more behavior focused. It's focused on advanced persistent threats, or APTs, and sophisticated attacks. It requires you to enroll, onboard it to the system. Like for MDE, we're onboarding it to MDE, and then MDE collects data from that endpoint and allows you to detect, where an attack originated from and how it might be spreading laterally to other devices. It allows you to isolate devices and then remote into them from only your console, using MDE to be able to apply remediations and investigate what's going on and collect data and things like that. So the whole point is to recognize these attacks and then remediate them as soon as possible, ideally with an automated solution. And then finally, we've got what's called an endpoint protection platform. And I wasn't sure whether to put this to the left of EDR or after, really, but it's because it depends, again, on who you talk to, what defines an endpoint protection platform. For Microsoft refers to MDE Plan 1 as their endpoint protection platform. In other words, attack surface reduction, next generation protection, and the centralized configuration and monitoring of the whole solution. So that's what they refer to it as. But if you talk to somebody else, they might include EDR as part of that endpoint protection platform. But regardless of how you define it, most experts agree that in the world we live in today, antivirus alone is not enough. Organizations need a combination of all of these capabilities to have like a comprehensive endpoint security solution. And that's to deal with attacks like this. This is the a visualization of the SolarWinds supply chain attack that happened back. I think it was discovered in December of 2020. And this is a sophisticated attack. It's doing a lot of different things here. You can see that Microsoft labeled this attack as Solorigate, or the attacker, I should say. And then later on, they relabeled the bad actor as Nobelium. This was coming in through, the SolarWinds software that just about everybody uses. So, and it was very quiet, and it took about 9 months to come to fruition. And so it's a complicated attack that an antivirus is not equipped to deal with. EDRs are chiefly looking for behaviors, right? And so they're looking for behaviors like this: execution and persistence, defense evasion, exfiltration, lateral movement. It's looking for all those types of behaviors, and it sees how they relate to one another, and it will show you the history of how they happened. That you can view all of this, and so it helps you see the big picture of what's going on. And it uses, like, this is the MITRE attack framework here. So basically, all of these attacks follow a known pattern, right? So execution and persistence, that's here in the MITRE attack framework here. Defense evasion, that's here as well. Exfiltration, that's here as well. That's getting information back to the attacker once they've invaded. So EDR is built for these kinds of attacks. Because of these high-profile attacks, on May 12, 2021, President Biden signed an executive order, and it's called Improving the Nation's Cybersecurity. And it basically outlines the cybersecurity measures and requirements to harden the U.S. digital infrastructure, is what that's there for, and make sure that these sophisticated attacks can't happen anymore. And you can see here, this is where this executive order requires that all federal agencies deploy some kind of EDR solution. And so it's becoming a big deal. I think the wake-up call was probably the SolarWinds attack for most people. But we're seeing this at Planet as well, right? There's a lot of our customers are starting to see it as not a nice to have, but a need to have with regards to deploying an EDR. We're having a lot of customers go to Microsoft Defender for Endpoints. So highly recommend solution. And that's the last layer that I want to talk about. Now, we don't have much time left, so I'm going to skip through these, but I kind of touched on all these already in the different areas. I do want to point out that the feature parity is a little bit different. This kind of outlines that, like Microsoft Threat Experts shows that in GCC high tenants and GCC high, GCC high, DoD, in those types of tenants, they don't have Microsoft Threat Experts yet. Web content filtering is in development. Network discovery is only available in GCC, but not in these other ones. So they're getting there. Microsoft's goal is to deliver all the commercial features and functionality to U.S. government customers, but some of these just aren't yet available, and these are the known gaps. Microsoft is a leader in this area of endpoint protection, so they do very well. And I just wanted to point that out. This is Gartner's Magic Quadrant from May of 2021. I think they came out with a more recent one that shows similar results. So now we're to our second poll. I apologize I took so much time. But what products are you using today for endpoint security? Ken, do you already have that up? I don't have my
You should
teams
see
up.
it in the chat window by now, and if you could just, we'd love to know what you're using. I listed the top 5, so if there's something that you're using that's not in there, and you can choose multiple selections as well. So if you want to take a response, you may be using multiple products today, and we're just kind of curious what's going on in the industry, compared to what Gartner saw back. Gartner saw back in May of 2021. So it looks like people are using a combination of tools, a lot of Microsoft. Again, these are in order of the upper right quadrant, Microsoft, CrowdStrike, Trend Micro. So yeah, I think we figured we'd see a smattering of a little bit of each. I think more people are getting drawn to the Microsoft suite of services and seeing more value out of some of the higher level SKUs because of the way in which these products are all integrated together and how they talk to each other and surface all kinds of intelligence using AI and things like that. So, it's becoming a much stronger product in the marketplace. So just wanted to see what that was about, see how where all you're at. And that's it. So we can move on because we're running out of time.
Yep, running out of time. Okay, so I'm just going to finish off by very quickly saying that there are more layers of defense beyond MDE. MDE is just one component, like I said, of the Microsoft Defender. XDR, or Extended Detection and Response, is what that stands for. It's one component of the overall solution. There's a lot more in there, and all of those can feed up into a SIM tool, a Security Information Event Manager tool, like Azure Sentinel. So it's a very comprehensive solution that Microsoft has around security. And with that, I will turn over the final say to Jake.
Awesome. Well, we've kind of already covered this slide. One of the things that I want to just kind of quickly state is, if we go ahead and build this out, when we talk about insider and external threats, inside's obviously on the lower side and external threats are on the outside. Notice the importance of Azure Sentinel in this diagram. It is essentially what all these components report back to. So it's just critical to have a SIM SOAR like Sentinel or another product. But the whole importance of visibility is something that we want to stress. You can't protect what you can't see out in your environment. And having a tool like Azure Sentinel or other type of SOAR type product, you absolutely are able to raise your security posture and identify issues quicker and faster. So we can move to the next slide. I know we're really tight on time here. I'm not going to read this slide. I just want to show you guys, we have seven kind of general best practices. This could be blown out to hundreds of best practices in the device category. So what we've done is we just kind of listed some of these for you guys, and it'll be in the deck so you can read through them. But essentially, it's what Shane's already covered. We want to manage the devices, get the management on there, get all the tools on there, kind of thing. And so these are the best practices around devices. And so that's all I had for this slide, I think, since we're kind of running out of time. I'm going to get to the questions. So
yeah, so we always love when you guys send us questions. You might have noticed we've moved to a new platform for registration where you can actually submit a question in advance. We want to make sure we get to that. So Brendan sent in a question to us about BitLocker, and Shane's prepared to talk about it real quick. So let's get to that real quick.
Okay, so yeah, and the question was around BitLocker compliance and reporting. And if you're like my other customers, you're mainly interested in what we were talking about before, which is I need to be able to prove that these machines are BitLockered. It's one thing to say I'm pushing out BitLocker, but I need to be able to prove that it was BitLockered. And so the way to do that is you can do it in a few different ways. I want to point out what it looks like in Intune and what it looks like in Configuration Manager. So in Intune, your main tool is going to be compliance. If you said, I talked about this compliance policy before, you want to apply this to your whole environment and say require BitLocker, and then you'll be able to very easily see which devices are not compliant because of they're not BitLockered. So a good way to see it and be able to look up a specific device and say, oh, it's not compliant, it's not BitLockered, if you need to look up a specific device. So I can look this up and see whether they're compliant or not based on a specific device. Another way to see it is from the summary screen. I can look and see the policy assignment status for compliance, see if it succeeded. So that's just a way to see that the policy was assigned successfully in the first place, make sure that that is got integrity. And I can go in here and look in my reports under device compliance, and I can see a list here of which devices are compliant or not. So all that ties into compliance. But there's also the encryption report, and this is a very good report. You go under devices and monitor, and you can look at this encryption report, and you can see the status of all your devices and if they're encrypted or not right here based on this report that comes back through Intune. So those are the best ways to do it through Intune. And then with Configuration Manager, your main tool is going to be the reports. Configuration Manager has like over 400 built-in reports, and you can build your own custom reports. You can do pretty much anything you want to do in Configuration Manager. But you'd want to, your main tool is one of the built-in reports, Computer Compliance Report, which can show you, the status of computers with their compliance. If you want to look at an overall summary level, you can look at this report, BitLocker Enterprise Compliance Dashboard. Will show you your overall state of your environment. And this one here shows BitLocker Enterprise Compliance details. So with this one, it shows information about overall BitLocker compliance across your organization for the collection of computers to which you deployed the BitLocker management policy in particular. So different levels that you can view compliance at.
I think we're out of time, Shane,
okay.
Jake,
Yep.
But we did get a couple more questions in, so it pays to get your questions early because we'll plan on making sure we have time to answer them in the session. So by all means, next time when you register, ask us a bunch of questions in advance. We'll make sure we build it into the presentation. The questions we did not get to, we will definitely respond to, and you're welcome to stay on a few more minutes and we can talk about it right now, but I want to make sure we wrap this up. And we want to thank you, Shane and Jake, for this great conversation today, for giving us an overview of supporting your IT mission, securing your endpoints with the Microsoft Cloud. Please remember to check out our blog. There's lots of valuable information up there. We've sent you the link in the chat window. If there's a topic you want to discuss for future YouAlreadyOwnIts, please contact us. Contact your cloud strategist or your account executive. And thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next month when we talk about some of the Ignite headlines and excitement there around the Office 365 Power Platform space and the Office 365 Modern Workspace. We'll probably do Azure updates in December from Ignite. So we're probably going to break it up because there's probably a lot of information that we're going to be going over. So thanks for joining us. If you want to stick around a few minutes, Jake and Shane, if you have a couple minutes, and the folks who asked the two other questions, we'll try to get to those right now. Jake and Shane, do you have a couple seconds to stick around?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. So the first question was, you mentioned settings template to meet the various regulatory compliances. Is there a link to those?
A link to the settings template? Is that in Intune that we're talking about, or?
I don't know who asked the question because I don't see a name next to it, which is interesting.
So if we're talking about what I think we're talking about here.
And if you ask the question, by all means, go ahead and speak up if you can unmute for a second.
Yeah, feel free to explain what you're talking about there if I'm
if you're still.
I don't think they're going to have the ability to come off of mute, but it looks like it was Randall Cunningham. If Randall, if you're still around and want to confirm in the chat.
Read it to me one more time. Read it to me one more time.
Yeah, I don't see Randall on the call still.
Sure. You mentioned a setting template to meet the various regulatory compliances. Is there a link to those?
I just unmuted his mic, so Randall, you can go ahead and talk if you'd like to talk.
He might be talking about the STIG.
Yeah, when you first started talking about all the compliance regulations at Microsoft, it was pretty early in the conversation, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe the template for the Windows machines that Microsoft suggests you use, maybe?
I don't remember now.
Okay.
Trying to absorb all this information, but when you had all the HIPAA and FedRAMP
Yeah,
and
so
all those things up there. There was some mention of some template that you could use to adjust your policy settings to match.
yeah,
those.
so yeah, there's two.
Microsoft default template or something, right?
You might be talking. It might be the STIG. So yeah, if and this is what we do in cases where if we can't manage with Intune and use the security baselines, then, or if somebody prefers the STIG, then this is a good way to go. So it's available out in the STIG document library.
Oh, okay.
Out here, so just look for Windows 10 STIG, and it's available in this Windows 10 STIG document library. And what you want to do is look for, let's see, it's an actual group GPO that you can apply. And group policy objects, where is it? I'll have to look up the exact one where it's in here. It's in here somewhere. I just need to find it under Windows 10.
In the follow-up email, we'll make sure we put a link to it, though.
I appreciate it.
But it's a GPO you can download, and it gives you and it helps you be at least apply all the STIG properties, and those address a lot of CMMC and NIST 800-171 things. So yeah, we do that when we're deploying like an AVD environment. We use that. We've come to start using that STIG, especially when we use an Azure AD DS or Azure AD Domain Services. If that's the only option we've got, then we deploy the GPO for the STIG. So.
All right, I appreciate that very much. Thanks.
Well, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
It looks like the other gentleman who asked the question is no longer on, so I guess we'll take that one offline.
Okay.
So with that,
I'll just reply to it.
Barring any other last-minute comments or questions, we can go ahead and wrap this up, I guess. Last chance, going once, twice. Okay. Thanks for your time today. We appreciate you. We'll see you next month on You Already Own It Office Hours.